I think there's something very worrying happening, as it were, on the left. You know, it used to be that it was the conservatives, both in America and Europe, who used to criticize people for criticizing religion. You know, that used to be a right-wing polemic. Now, it's become a left-wing polemic. You know, that somehow, and I think the argument goes that Muslim groups in America and Western Europe are often economically disadvantaged and suffer from various kinds of prejudice and racism and have difficult lives, and therefore to criticize the religion is to further attack them, and that shouldn't be done. You know? And I mean, that's as best as I can put that argument. You know? And I think that was the argument in that Affleck issue, and I think it was the argument in the division within Penn American Center about honoring Charlie Hebdo. And it crops up over and over again. And I mean, and it happened to a certain extent when the trouble was surrounding me, but actually less so then. In those days, the argument was, the criticisms were still mostly from the right, from people like, you know, the Cardinal of New York, or the Chief Rabbi of Great Britain, or the Pope, you know, all of whom found it perfectly possible to sympathize with Islamic religious leaders about me. You know, so, and that taught me something interesting about the unity of the God Squad. You know, now it seems that this liberal spirit of appeasement, of political correctness, is a new problem. It's because, of course, it's obviously quite right to say that communities that are discriminated against and oppressed and economically disadvantaged need to have those issues looked at, you know, and we need to try and deal with those issues. That's not the same thing as saying you can't criticize ideas they seem to hold. You know, I mean, if you can't ring fence ideas. It's one thing to say people must not be discriminated against, but to say that ideas become illegitimate or legitimate because they're held by disadvantaged people, you know, it's just a flaw. And it's very important to remember that when free expression is diminished or restricted, it's usually minority groups that suffer first. It's their free expression that is restricted before the majorities. You know, so it's always in the interests of minority communities to defend free expression because their own rights are involved. You know, and if by doing that they have to put up with a certain amount of criticism of their own ideas, then that just goes with the territory. And it's very worrying to see well-meaning people, people who are coming from a good place, joining in with the world of censorship, and therefore ending up in a very bad place. And I think it's perfectly legitimate to be highly critical of religion in general, and in particular right now, the use is being made of the Islamic religion because of, I mean, just look what's happening in the world. You know, we have to, I think to say that that's not to do with Islam is just a logical impossibility. Of course it is. If everybody engaged in acts of Islamic terrorism says that they're doing it in the name of Islam, who are we to say they're not? You know, I mean, now of course, what they mean by Islam might well not be what most Muslims mean by Islam, but it's still a form of Islam, and it's a form of Islam that's become unbelievably powerful in the last 25 or 30 years. A form of Islam that oppresses and kills Muslims more than anyone else. You know, I mean, that's to say, most of the Muslim deaths in the world right now are not caused by American drones. They're caused by Islamic attacks on Muslims of another type. You know, Shia attacks on Sunnis, Sunni attacks on Shias. Most of the oppression of Muslims in the world right now is carried out by other Muslims. You know, whether it's the Taliban in Afghanistan or, you know, or the Ayatollahs in Iran or wherever it might be. But to say that this is not Islam is to misname the problem. The problem is that there's been a mutation in Islam, which has become unusually virulent and powerful, and needs to be dealt with. But in order to deal with it, we have to first call it by its true name.